Welcome to Permission to Evolve. I'm your host, Brandon Thielk. I am a performance and life coach. I'm joined by my co-host and producer, Holly Deschenes. So today we're going to be getting into a few different topics here. I just got back from San Juan, Puerto Rico, so that was pretty fun. It ended up raining the whole time, so the beach vibes weren't totally there. But we have the Winter Olympics going on, and so there's some headlines there. And, so that's going to kind of lead to our topic today, which is going to be permission to shine. And this is through that lens of, being in the spotlight. It's also kind of this permission to be seen. And, a lot of times, athletes specifically will have breakthroughs and then fall off immediately afterwards. And so we're going to go into some details about why that is. And yeah, so I'm excited to get to it. So yeah, first off my trip, yes, we just took a week trip to Puerto Rico, and we got a hotel on the beach and was like really looking forward to just relaxing. And that wasn't the vibe at all. It's just rained every day. We got about an hour on the beach total in 5 days. But it was super cool. There's a rainforest nearby, so we did some adventure stuff instead. And so they had some like natural water slides. You kind of hike through the rainforest and then slide down those. And then there's like cliff diving and rope swings and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was great to connect to nature. I guess that wasn't our full plan, but it was nice to get that dynamic in. And also we kind of missed out on, because the weather, they call the bioluminescence bay. So there's like these plankton bacteria things that glow in the dark at night. And so I guess they're best under the new moon as well in terms of being able to see them. So, with the weather being rough, that didn't work out as well. Was really looking forward to that. That would have been a kind of once in a lifetime deal. We really enjoyed Old San Juan, which is like the city part, a lot of colorful buildings, and there's like old forts and stuff. And yeah, I would definitely go back to that part. I really enjoyed that. Prices were cheaper than by the resorts and stuff. The resorts, everything just kind of seemed expensive for no reason. And the downtown vibe was kind of more my speed. So yeah, it was cool to get away for a little bit, reset, and yeah, good to connect to some adventure.
So did you cliff dive?
Yeah, it was like 15 feet or something. It wasn't too crazy. Yeah, so I'm not like a water person, so I don't have a lot of confidence there. And the only other time I had cliff dive before was in Thailand, probably 9 years ago or something. And I'm not a heights person either. So that one I think it was like 25, 30 feet. It was a little bit more intimidating. And so I was kind of like terrified to do that one. This one seemed pretty easy. And it was good that I had that experience, because this was a much lesser version.
Yeah, cliff diving's not on my list, but yeah, so I was curious.
Yeah, I'm just trying to gain that water confidence. I didn't grow up swimming and stuff, so it's kind of one of those things I picked up later on. And you know, being on boats and stuff and things like that, I'm pretty comfortable. But anything too crazy water wise, I stay away from.
I can't say all of that since it's a third of a triathlon, but
Yeah.
I'm also an adult onset swimmer, and so there's a different challenge in the water when you didn't grow up in it for sure. I mean,
Hmm.
any kind of crazy jumping into it aside. My sister went to Puerto Rico for a job years and years ago, and she talked about the glowing plankton or whatever. But she was, I think, for the job, she was there like 6 months. So obviously it's a
Oh,
little more
yeah.
time to make sure you got to see it, whatever.
Yeah, it was about a 2 hour trip from where we're at, and then you basically take a kayak for another like 30 minutes. So, it was kind of a big involved thing, and we didn't want to have to go through it and, not actually get to see anything. So
Do you want to start with the question before we
yeah,
get into the topic?
let's jump into the question here.
Okay. So this question is a little bit about rebranding. And I know we live in an age now, right? Where it's like personal brands and whatever. And recently, there was Cracker Barrel did a rebrand, and like the world came back at them about
Yeah, yeah.
that
Hmm.
and different things like that. My question is, knowing, you've done a little bit of rebranding recently, and when you think about branding, what's kind of how you make the decision? I don't know, that's not the right way to say it. Like how you worked through that idea, what it meant to you, but then also when you like notice things being rebranded in the world, like, I don't know, like some people have big feelings about that. So let's talk about like dealing with that too.
Especially, well, like in the Cracker Barrel instance, obviously, that's a very old traditional brand. People are very attached to it. Yeah, I think when you have like older companies that have done things a certain way forever, I think that's definitely, people are pretty set in their ways. They don't like those changes generally. The world we live in, I think, you kind of have to be able to make changes faster and, things aren't as traditional. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's the resistance to change, which, we talk about a lot, where people like consistency, they like to know what to expect. And so especially if they're emotionally attached to something, like a restaurant like Cracker Barrel, where yeah, maybe you like grew up going there or something, it's like nostalgic for you. And so anything to shake that up would be like kind of ruining a tradition, basically. And because anytime we got big emotions tied to it, and and that's like it's like people with like Coke or Pepsi, right? Or, it's like you have these loyalties to things or Apple products or whatever it is. It's just like, there's usually personal preferences, there's stories, there's, oh, like, yeah, like this is what got me through college or whatever. And so it makes us reflect a little bit more when something's been a big part of our lives. And, that's always with like generational differences too, like the TV shows you watch growing up and things like that. And those references, it's generally in those formative years, like things get pretty locked into place. And so we form a lot of those emotional attachments because it creates that consistency that, it's this safety, this connection of like, oh, like I know that I'm going to be able to experience this thing in this way. And I look forward to that. So, yeah, a lot of times that can really shake people up. And a lot of people don't like to change very much, right? So that's where we get the big reactions. And, so my own personal process, so really the last year, I was operating under Evolved Athlete, basically the duration of my coaching business here. So that was about 9 years at the time. And it just felt like limiting to me where, I started doing corporate work and I had some interests going in some other directions. And so it was a year-long process for me to first I needed to detach from Evolved Athlete and just kind of like put that to the side for now. And I just wasn't sure because it didn't really make sense for that to be like all that I did anymore. And it was just a lot of like wrestling with it. What's the next version going to look like? What suits me now? It was like something I first started with my career and I've been at this over 10 years now. So it just kind of made sense that my skill sets have expanded, all these different things. It just felt very limiting for me to just stay in that lane. When you're starting out, generally people are always like, oh, you need to pick like a niche, right? Or a certain lane. And, I think that is important when you start out. You kind of need to get something going and it's easier to just focus on what you're really good at. But, I think the longer you're at it, now we have creativity coming into play of like, what are some different applications for my skill set? I shifted to a personal brand where it's just like, okay, I'm me, the coach, but then I have different offshoots now. So that's Lightning Performance is my corporate brand, and then Evolved Athletes, my athlete work, but it's more of like a program. It's not like my company, right? And so it was just really for me, it was like a reorganization to expand outward to where I'm not limiting my options or where the customer can kind of connect to be like, okay, all along the way, I've been working with people that weren't athletes, but I was still like under Evolved Athlete. And so there's like a disconnect there. So it's just really about the realignment so that people can understand like who I work with. And so now it's just more high performers or people who are going through life transitions or needing to work through some trauma. And it's a very broad category. And I, I don't like to be limited in any way. I always talk about that. So yeah, just my name is like good for now. And yeah, I just kind of see it running off into different kind of like program styles, which are just little subdivisions underneath me. But it's really just the same work no matter what I'm doing. It's just being able to dial in who I'm speaking to with each different category, because that does require different language to connect people on that level. And so, yeah, it was about a year-long process where I was just kind of like wrestling with it and getting clear exactly what my skill set is and like, how I want to apply that. And, and really it kind of distills down to, I help people create breakthroughs in their life, right? So wherever they're stuck, it's usually something from the past, and this podcast is technically marketing for that, right? It's like I'm just talking about, hey, like it's not, you don't need something new, you probably just need to unpack the past, right? Because that's where you're stuck, that's where you're hung up. That's where I usually play in with anybody. I'm not doing a lot of goal setting. I'm not doing much trying to teach them new skill sets, but more of just let go of old limiting beliefs that they have and old attachments. And so it is more in the realm of the past. And the idea of permission to evolve is like we're creating permission for the hangups that you have so that you can evolve. So that's like it's more of you grow pretty naturally when you detach from the past. Our mind is just always reaching for safety, and that's what we know. And so we always have to find some space to create room for the unknown, and that's where we do evolve. That's where we integrate new knowledge, skills, and abilities. And so that is identity work as well. So we have to change who you believe you are. So I think that everybody should always be asking these questions of like I don't think life is to just show up and be like, okay, this is who I am. I'm a finished product and I can't ever change. I think there should always be adjustments being made, and sometimes we build a life that no longer fits for us where we need massive changes. Other times it's smaller. But I think with rebranding, it's like you really just want to feel good about what you're putting forward, and you want to be able to convey the message to reach the people you're supposed to help. So I think it's when there are the big reactions, it's just people are tied to the past in some way, and they like the consistency piece. They think consistency means safety. And that we've talked about this a lot too. A lot of times people think like all changes are bad. They don't like trust the unknown. They don't trust that there might actually be a better version. And a lot of times, I think we can be a little bit jaded with the way corporations run here in America, where it's like, oh, like streaming services or whatever. It's like $5 a month, and then like we're like, oh, we're gonna make these changes, and so now it's like $50 a month, right? It's like it always just seems to be worse. Or like cell phones, that kind of thing. Like, oh, we have these new plans out, but it's always like more expensive and you get less, right? And it's like, so it's just like I think people generally have a lot of those ideas that like, oh, if it's changing, then it's usually going to be less value, or it's going to be different in a negative way rather than an actual positive change.
We're going to shift into permission to shine. And I know you referenced the Olympics. I think you have some
Mhm.
other examples as well. And in full transparency, I have not kept up with the Olympics. So yeah, so that particular example, I don't know that I'll have much to say, but yeah, I'm excited to talk through this. I think the idea of being able to shine is very much akin to being seen, maybe one notch up. I don't know.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I would say it's a little one notch up probably.
yeah,
But yeah, so unless I don't watch much sports myself. I work with athletes, but very casual observer most of the time. I prefer to play them, but I do appreciate when people can do something exceptionally well, especially some of these crazy things they can do with their body. And I haven't watched much of the Olympics, but I was watching it yesterday. My dad's visiting, so we're just kind of hanging out watching it. And there was like the skeleton. It's like a luge thing where these people are like flying down this ice luge at like 80 miles an hour and stuff, and it's like pretty wild. And then people like there's a big ski jump where people are like going down the hill backwards and doing all these flips and stuff, and so it actually excited me to watch it because it's pretty special what these people can do. And the thing most people don't understand is a lot, especially probably Winter Olympics, it's like a lot of these athletes like really don't make any money. They're having to like put their heart and soul into something, just barely scrape by. And the Olympics really is their one time to shine, because if they do well, they might get some sponsorship deals, things like that. But most of the time, it's especially in a lot of these poorer countries, there's just not many resources for them, and so that level of dedication is also pretty cool. That they're so dedicated to the craft and willing to go through that, like kind of the financial strain and stress. And that's a big thing with triathletes as well. You're doing massive amounts of training and trying to make money where you can, and it just takes a lot of dedication. And the specific example that has been, I guess, trending is it's a figure skater. His name's Malinin, I believe. And so he did this quadruple axel like as a figure skater, and that's like something that had never been done before. And then he's like also doing like backflips on the ice and stuff. And I don't know much about it, but it was really really impressive to watch. But so when he like broke through, he got all this attention immediately and then kind of fell apart after that. Right. And, with the interviews, basically what they're saying is he said that so after the breakthrough and all the attention, when he went to go do it again, like all his traumas came to the surface. So his mind just went completely black, like, all this negative stuff started to come in. And then yeah, he didn't perform well after that. So, he's kind of fallen and, everybody had all these high expectations, but when the spotlight came on him, like he crumbled. And, I went through a very similar thing with baseball, where I was going around the country trying to get signed, doing these tryouts. And it was just like the longer I was in it, it was just like, and a lot of the tryouts were few and far between, much like the Olympics is, where you're not getting a lot of opportunities and you have to make the most of them. And so, definitely towards the end, which I've talked about before, it was just like my mind was like attacking me. It was like eating me alive. Like I was losing all this weight. I lost all my velocity pitching wise. And it was just like I couldn't shake it. It was just like nothing but like dark negative thoughts. And yeah, it just kind of felt I'd get like kind of paranoid and stuff. Like it just felt like all this like dark energy was around me and my performance would just crumble. I don't think this is something that's like talked about enough. Is because a lot of the takes on it have been, sports psychologists talking about like, oh, like, yeah, you just focus on happy thoughts or listen to music or whatever. And I'm just, when you have trauma, there's really this idea that it's really not safe to be seen. If you grew up in a very intense household, and there could be abuse, things like that, every little mistake you make, like, could mean that you're shouted at for hours on end and you're left alone to pick up the pieces and like all these things. And so it's in those environments, it's really not safe to be seen. And so being seen could be our biggest fear. It could just really fry our nervous system. And so I've personally gone through this, and it sounds like this guy was going through that, where it's, trauma is a different intensity. And it's just like our number one priority is to stay safe. It's not to be successful. It's not to shine. If you've had some of those really intense things happen, especially in childhood, it's a lot of times the way you survive is by being quiet and by like avoiding conflict, by hiding, by running away from things. So, if that's your foundation, it's going to be very difficult to step into the spotlight. And you might break through, but then it's like, can you stay there? That's the question. Because, you can break through when the attention's not on you. But as soon as that spotlight comes on you, it does wake up all the demons. And so that's why it's so important to do this work, is because that stuff's in you. And the only way to conquer it is to really confront it. And so it sucks to see such an amazing performance kind of shift so quickly. But it's now he's got 4 years to unpack this stuff and work through it. And I'm sure he'll come back stronger, but it's like, it is a process. This like, if you're terrified to be seen because of like the volatile personalities, the abusive energy, like that kind of stuff, it's, your body will shut down on you. And it's very difficult. You can't use simple little strategies to try and overpower that. Okay. A lot of these strategies, they're just superficial that are helping, that might help somebody that's pretty well established, that's far along, that has a pretty good control of their mind. But if somebody's super young and this is their first time out there, none of that stuff's going to work. It takes the deeper work. It takes addressing that, creating safety in the nervous system, making peace with the past. And that is deep work, and it's necessary work, especially if you've been in very intense situations, because otherwise you may just kind of hide in the background your whole life. And none of us really want that. It's an adaptation. I don't think any of us came here to be like, oh yeah, I just want to avoid everybody and be in the background my whole life, especially if we have gifts and skills. one of the best things we can do is share that with the world. We need more people that are excellent at things, that are creative, that can really put forward something that really affects people. And so athletic expression is a pretty cool thing. To see something that only a couple of people on the planet can do is very special. And another one was the guy climbing the building a couple of weeks ago, Alex Honnold. Not that he does that stuff all the time, but it just brought so much more attention to it. And his mind's so solid. He's faced all these fears, like over the years. He was able to just kind of do it pretty easily. But that's the difference between somebody really far into their career that's like used to it and somebody that's brand new, right? And so a lot of these Olympic athletes, they are just kids. They're so young that they've been training their whole life, and yeah, to have the world's attention on you, that can be pretty scary. And so, it takes a lot of self-compassion, and because I'm sure he's going to be harder on himself than anybody else would be, and it's a bit of a process, but it's that stuff got exposed, it gets brought to the surface, and we have that choice. What are we going to do with it? Do I just stuff it back down? Do I do I give up? Or do I continue to work with it? Because that's what takes you to your next level, is when you really can conquer those demons and come out the other side stronger. Then it's so much more impactful and powerful, and you start to create consistency where you really become like so self-contained that like it doesn't really matter the opinions of other people. And so that's saying, so many of us grew up in situations where other people's opinions really mattered. They were often forced on us. We had to do a lot of self-betrayal to exist in those environments. It takes a while to rebuild that stuff. And, in the triathlon world, we've seen this a couple times over the years, because a lot of my clients are triathletes. So I see more of that stuff than these other disciplines. But yeah, so I feel like this is kind of the moment, since this is what happened, that, this is the trauma can really sabotage your success. It can really shut you down. You can have all these wonderful skills, but if the foundation is shaky because you're trying to stay safe, that's usually going to win out. It's going to be overpowering, and it is a process to work through it to get back to that consistency.
For sure. The triathlon stuff is interesting because there have been, just to reference that, there's been world champions who like have these amazing world championship races, and then essentially they can't get back on a podium for, I don't want to say years, but for a while after that, and just really struggle with it. Or they have like a big breakout and you think, oh man, this person's going to be great and on the scene, and then they just sort of disappear.
That's why with this work, we do go in and address those things, because everybody has them to a certain degree, but some people it is just more intense. And if it's there, it's going to be exposed at some point. I remember last year, the T100, it was their first year, and, there's a triathlete, it was Yuri Kolin. He broke through, and, he's a young guy too. That was the thing. When you're younger, it is more likely to happen because you haven't built this consistency of success. And so he won the Singapore race and kind of burst on the scene, and then got a bunch of sponsors, and like all this stuff just showed up for him overnight. And yeah, so he had a pretty tough season the rest of the year. He kind of crumbled. He had to back out of, I think it was the Vegas race. And, he specifically said it was his mind, right? His mind was like attacking him, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about here. If there's that deeper stuff, if there's not the track record that's built up over time, it's the unconscious, subconscious, that's about 90% of our mindset, probably 95 actually. So we can't overpower that with the 5%. So whatever is underneath, it's at some point it's going to come up, and it is a momentum thing. If I can stay present, and if I can be kind of focused on my success, I can keep that stuff at bay for a while. But if you're not used to it, you're getting all this attention, and with attention, you get kind of mixed reviews. There's some people that are supportive, there's some people that are talking shit, and you might feel attacked. And so that kind of pushes at all that stuff and wakes it up. And so it really is about coming to peace with it. And it's deep, hard work, but that's really what's needed to create consistency over time. And I prefer to just approach it head on with my clients. Hey, we know this stuff's happened, so like, let's look at it, because you don't want it coming out during the race. You don't want it coming out during the performance, but we don't like do it right before. We might target some races okay, like I want to do really well here. So we're going to address that months ahead of time and keep working at it. So it softens until you get to the race. Now it's okay. I got a pretty good handle on this stuff because it is destabilizing, right? So if I've built my identity, if I've built things on this pain, I can't just kick that pain out and then know what to do next. It's going to be, we have to work through the pain and we have to integrate it into the whole so that you can actually utilize it. You can start to feel more solid because if I'm shifting those identities, if I'm letting go of that, there is this idea of like, okay, I don't know who I am without this. Okay. And so generally our mind's trying to latch on to what's known. We talked about that last week with ego death. That's what that is. I'm trying to latch on to the things that made me safe, even though if they're sabotaging everything I want in life. We really have to approach it delicately and integrate it over time so that we can have more consistency rather than, yeah, just plucking the piece out. And now it's just like there's this big gap within me and my mind has to like fill in that gap with things and it doesn't know what to do. So that can be pretty disorienting. I can be pretty disconnected and floaty for a while after that. So generally we approach these things softly and gradually so that, it doesn't throw your whole life into upheaval or throw your performance into upheaval. And I think it's unfortunate that these things happen, but it's also, I think it's good that this one's getting a lot of attention because yeah, you can't use little hacks. You can't just do the superficial strategy stuff. And unfortunately, like, so a coach can only take you as deep as they've gone themselves. Okay. So a lot of these coaches, their experience primarily comes, it's first from schooling, right? It's just like a clinical approach to things. And yeah, so it's like, but you have to meet yourself at that deep level to be able to really help somebody through it. That's kind of one of my gripes with a lot of therapists as well is, yeah, you can learn all the terms, you can learn all the stuff, but how do you live it? Do you go deep into yourself and resolve these things, or do you just try to tell other people how to do it from that superficial knowledge? So the only thing that truly teaches us is experience. You have to be able to experience yourself at a deep level to hold that space for another. And because, yeah, if you're trying to throw little hacks on these big, deep problems, well, one is very inauthentic and disconnected, but two, it doesn't actually help anything. It just makes it worse because if I'm using a hack and trying to put it on top of something deep like that, and it's not working for that person, now I'm actually killing their confidence even more because they're like, oh, I'm doing it wrong. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is supposed to help me, but that's not, that can't help you. It's a situation where you need like a power washer to clean something, but you're using like a squirt gun or something, or like a little it's just like not potent enough. The darker thing, the heavy thing is going to overpower it because that's what plays on our safety, right? We need to stay safe in order to perform. Peak performance is really about your ability to be present and relax. And that was the other cool part. So watching some of the skiers, it was like the ones that were really having fun with it. They're loose, smiling, joking around. Those are all the ones that did awesome. It was like their body was relaxed. They had full access to their skill set. And that's what you get from like a seasoned, experienced person. They've built this confidence where they're not questioning themselves. In that place, like you just trust your abilities rather than overthinking every little detail. So it was pretty clear, like, because I see things through this lens, but it's just like how somebody like approached the starting line. I could tell whether or not they were going to do well, right? Because it's just like, okay, they're loose or they're tight, right? They're smiling or they look scared, right? If they look scared, it's that deeper stuff going on. It's them doubting themselves. It's, their body starts to tighten up. They might be thinking of the trauma or some sort of like, I'm not good enough, like low self-worth thoughts. And that all plays on to many ideas that I think most folks experience to some degree during childhood, because we're just trying to be funneled into a system, and if you don't work well within that system, you automatically start feeling bad about yourself, right? And so it's just kind of interesting to see it through that lens of like who's really enjoying themselves, like who's really actually confident in their abilities. Because if you're really confident in your abilities, you don't have to think about it, right? And so that's what training helps that, but it is also the repetition of, okay, I know what this feels like. I can do it over and over again. But when we add pressure and the spotlight on things, that's what wakes up the deeper stuff. If we don't have a good relationship with being seen, being visible, that stuff is going to start to surface. And depending on the intensity of the experiences you've had, that might be a really intense experience, or that might just be, I just need to refocus my mind. It kind of depends on where you're at on the journey.
The other thing you made me think of with the going really dark is couple years ago, I think it was before T100, speaking of rebranding, rebranded to T100 when they were still like the PTO open races.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a guy, Colin Chartier, who won one
Mm-hmm.
of them. It was a big breakout, won $100,000. It was like a big deal. And then like 6 months later, tested positive for doping. And it was sort of, I don't know if you followed him at all, but it sort of was that,
Hey,
right? Like he got so dark, he could figure out how to do it without that kind of thing.
mhm.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think he's popped up recently. I think he's doing like breath work and
Yeah.
meditation stuff now
Yeah.
or something. So, based in that arena, it's like, okay, like all this pressure's on me. Like I got all these sponsorships, I have to perform. And so if you don't have that foundation built, like, you have to start thinking about some of those things, right? Of like, oh, well, like this actually this makes me feel stronger at least, and that's the important, like, the long road is the easy road, actually, right? Because the long road is like addressing these things ahead of time. It's a pain in the ass. It's tough work, but that's what allows you to build at a level that you're ready for. So sometimes people like have the breakouts and then they're confronted with all this stuff and they don't know what to do with it. And so, you might start to explore those other options. From what I can tell, like he's come out the other side of it and done a lot of reflection work, and so it served him. And, going back to, we talked about Alex Rodriguez a few weeks ago, and obviously steroids in baseball was a huge thing for about 15 years or so, the early 2000s. Well, it was probably way before that, but it really got a lot of attention. And it was just kind of the thing where like everybody was doing it. So in order to stay competitive, like you had to consider that stuff. There's no good answer to a lot of this stuff, especially when you have a huge spectator sport like baseball, where it does get pretty regular attention all summer long. You can't have off days. You can't be down for too long. Otherwise you might lose your spot, like that kind of stuff. And there's eyes always on you, especially if you're in New York or LA or something like that. These are all like very tough things that, you really have to be mentally strong, and you have to have this like really strong foundation about self-belief. If we have a lot of doubt, low self-worth, like that's where we're going to probably consider those things more, because we don't have the strength within to really stay solid in those intense pressure situations. And it's sad, but it's also the nature of it. Fans want to see people do exceptional things. It's like like 98 with like Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. They had this like home run battle, and both those guys were roided out of their minds. But it's like, but it was like revived baseball. It brought the whole sport back. Like, it got people excited. So it's a difficult balance, because, if you're watching sport, you generally want to see them perform exceptionally. And so those are some things that have to get considered, right? And it's not, it's just the nature of it. I don't know if it's good or bad. It just kind of is, right? There's always people looking for an edge. There's always trying to, especially like when there's a lot of money that you can be rewarded with. It's like some people make those calls because if I get one big contract, like I'm set for life, right? So is the shame really going to matter then? I don't know. It's like in baseball, you used to see it pretty regularly, where when the numbers started getting really high, where people are getting like $200 million contracts, you'd see guys have really good seasons before their free agency, and then they'd get the big contract, and then now there's all these extra expectations on them, and then they suck after that, right? They just fall apart, because when they're in the background, they can do well, but if it's just this guy has been paid like $200 million, like we need him to perform, now there's all these extra eyes on you. And, unless you're comfortable with that, it does expose all that stuff.
Let's talk about it for a not superhuman. Let's talk about it more from the standpoint, happy to use myself as an example, right? We've got a bunch of different things going on in my life. There's, I have a corporate career, but then we have this triathlon community that my husband and I kind of are the leaders of. I've got this podcast, I've got another podcast. I just picked up some content creation work, and there's a lot of opportunity to what feels like get exposed or let someone down or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, well, one is kind of knowing your limits. You're a high capacity person.
It's
So
like what limits?
I think like, your ability to focus and get things done like exceeds most people. But yeah, I think it's just knowing that anytime you're taking on something new, that there are going to be some of these things that are going to surface. And, we work every week, you do a great job of taking a deeper look at stuff. And that's really the key is, you want things at a manageable pace that, okay, like my life is, I'm used to this baseline and I'm taking one step up now, right? I'm adding this extra project or whatever it is. If already got a ton going on and I add a ton more, like that's going to be a lot harder because basically we just need one step up to keep building capacity, right? It's like, and through the new experiences, there's going to be little kinks to work out. There's going to be, there could be imposter syndrome. There could be all that stuff of like, well, I'm not sure if I'm capable of doing this, but it's just this willingness to sit down and work through it and work through the tension, work through the obstacles as they come up, because that's what builds confidence. And once we're confident, now we can work more efficiently because if I'm like getting the reps in and I'm like learning something new every day, like that starts accelerating my process. But a lot of times if we take things on and we're not doing that extra work, it's just like I'm having to fight through the tension all the time rather than look at the tension. And the tension's got a message to it. Okay. It's got something that I need to learn about myself to align with this new thing. And so a lot of people tend to override that. They just keep trying to push forward and then you hit burnout because your ability to focus starts to diminish because you're fighting through negative emotion every time you go do the thing. Okay. And so it's about the negative emotion's a signal. There's something it's trying to communicate with me. And if I take some time, if I take the step back and look at it and work through it and realign, now I get to take my next step. But a lot of times we just keep pushing against the walls, and because we might be on a timeline, we might feel like, yeah, I need to get this done or whatever it is. And so that extra pressure could really plug us into some dark things if we're not addressing it. That's like commonly what you'll see is people think they need to be a lot further along than they are. They need to take huge steps, but everything's this gradual building because every opportunity that's given to you, like you're just trying to prepare you for the next level of it. Right. So it's just like, that's saying like everybody like tells me like I should write a book and I should do all the speaking and like all that. So I'm just like, no, it's like all going to happen pretty naturally. I'm on this path. There's going to be a point where it's going to be my logical next step. But if I'm like taking that stuff on too early, it's going to be taking away from the things I'm currently doing. And it's like, that's a new arena. And so I need the space to do that. Right. And so it's taking things as you're ready for them, which, that's things you were given this new opportunity. It's like, yeah, like this is an extension of what I'm already doing. So I have some experience behind it. It's going to be a different expression of it, but it's not like us starting the podcast day one. Like you've been doing this for a year now. Right. So it's kind of these gradual increases where you're just like, okay, yeah, this might be a little challenging, but it feels manageable. But if it's like, if something seems like overwhelming and it's like really far off from where I'm operating, now I'm going to be plugged into a ton of resistance. And so that's why knowing yourself is one of the biggest keys to everything is like, well, like I have to know where I'm at in my journey and I have to know what I'm capable. I'm going to continuously expand and stretch myself, but I want steps that make sense. I want steps that are like a gradual increase off of what I'm doing, not some dramatic shift, right? Because that takes a lot of extra work. And if we're always in this stress response of trying to figure things out and working under pressure, things are going to start giving out there, right? And so it's just allowing yourself to be in the process and continue to work at it. And then it's like when you're ready for the bigger steps, they're going to come into view, right? with me in corporate work. It was something I thought about like 10 years ago. You know, as a 28-year-old, like being an executive coach probably isn't alignment, right?
Maybe not.
But it's like I'm like mid to late 30s now, so it's like more suitable, right? And it's not that it was like in my big game plan, but it's like, okay, when I was like ready for that stuff, like I met you and those doors opened, right? And now more of those doors are opening. So it's just like, it's kind of like if I would have tried to do that too early in the process, I would have been like fighting myself every step of the way. And, I've never worked in the corporate world. Like, but it's like, I know this process like in and out, and I can apply it to everything. So that's what like gave me the confidence to do that, is it's just like me moving over one step to what I'm already doing. Right. And, and so it's allowing yourself to be in the process. It's allowing things to unfold pretty naturally. Cause if I'm trying to force things now, I get a bunch of resistance, and then that's where I'm more likely to screw things up, is trying to take things on before I'm actually ready for them. And the ready piece is like, well, when I think about this thing, it should feel maybe a little scary, but mostly exciting. If it's predominantly fear, okay, maybe you're in over your head. But if it's mostly excitement, it's just like, okay, yeah, like there's going to be some things I have to work through, but it's not such a big leap that I'm just going to be plugged into fears or insecurities the whole time. Right? It's just going to be a gradual step up, and then the more I'm in it, the more I'm familiar with what I need to do. Now it just starts to become matter of fact, where it's just like I'm more efficient at it, and now I can take on more and more. But it's really about getting the reps in until it's just like you don't even have to think about it anymore.
In the work that you do with some of your corporate clients, I know one of the things you've worked on with some of them is it's like getting promoted. And we've talked about how you have to go back and unpack the past, but I'm thinking about if someone's listening to this and they're thinking about, what they'd like in this idea of being able to shine. If it's in the corporate arena and they're looking to get promoted, or if it's in the crazy world of content creation and they're wanting to be able to show up differently, or I don't know, maybe it's even like I'm thinking of like a family scenario, so maybe this isn't exactly the direction that you want to go with it, but I'm even thinking like there are these things where like you hide from your parents, right? Like maybe you really want to show up in a way that even like your family sees you for who you really are. Just as like a couple different examples. Like let's talk about like things people could be working on to like get there to be able to do that.
I mean, I guess with all of them, the common thread I see is a lot of times people get stuck in a certain role, right? Like this is how I'm used to operating, and promotion is like an obvious thing of like, okay, I'm going from this step to the next one, and so there's growth there. And a lot of times it's like, well, like what got me to this step took these skill sets. It took me interacting with people this specific way. But like usually the higher I go, like the more distance I have, like where I'm actually having to like manage from above, not be in the weeds. It's more of like that change in role is like difficult for people. And it's the same in family of like, okay, my parents, they know me as this version that they raised till 18 or 20 or whatever it is. That past is so like loaded, where it's like we have a pretty good sense of who we are in those dynamics. And so for me to show up differently, like I have to question those things. I have to question like, okay, so what got me here? Like, does that still work in terms of getting me to the next level? It never does. So whatever gets you there won't get you any further, because once we hit a wall with something, now we have to look back at the past being like, where am I hung up? Like, where am I stuck? Where is my mind fixed in thinking it needs to be this way? If I'm like managing somebody, well, do I have this desire to be liked by everybody? Do I take pride in being friendly and rather than being an authority and telling what people to do, telling people what to do, right? And it's not that you can't do that with kindness. It's a gap that people have to jump. I'm not sure what this is like. I haven't been this way before. And that in our relationships, the same. I haven't like been this way before. So I'm going to test things out with them to see how the response goes. But if I'm fearing the reactions, if I think that automatically they're not going to like me or they're going to disown me or I'm going to be abandoned, that's what keeps us locked in those systems usually is like, I have to be this way in order to have this relationship or to be in this role. It's about coming to terms with that. I need to be able to see that this is actually the thing that's holding me back, is my inability to have a conversation or confrontation, or my inability to form a boundary is like, it pulls at those desires of, we're always looking for other people's validation and wanting to be liked and like all that stuff. I'm going to have to step into some situations where there might be emotional reactions. If people are used to me being a certain way and I change all of a sudden, they don't know what to do with that. And that generally is a negative reaction. We don't usually want to make other people feel bad. So we think if there's a negative reaction, that automatically means a bad thing. Like, I disappointed them, I let them down. Once again, we're going back to those childhood patterns of internalizing any negative situation is always about ourselves. It's just like, no, like I can't operate at this level anymore. I have to level up. That takes me showing up differently. I do need to be okay with people having that resistance to change. I need, like, I'm changing and they don't know how to interact with me now. Okay. But usually these things are a gradual process where we just keep working it so that it's more of a smooth transition than an all at once thing. But just going back to the branding and all that, it's like dramatic change overnight. Like, a lot of people have a hard time with that. That's why I usually like ease my way into changes so that I can continue to meet people, but I'm not playing the same role. I'm like gradually shifting out of it. And a lot of people try to do that with therapy, where they're just like, oh, like, I'm just going to have these like harsh boundaries with like family now. And now it's like they don't know how to connect to me at all. Like, there's this huge gap of, we don't know how to relate anymore. Because if we go back to any of the old stuff now, usually if you're setting those boundaries, now we reinforce them with anger, right? That's not really the way to do it. They're gradual shifts. I know I have to head this way. I need to be detaching from things over here. I need to be questioning how we're showing up and how I'm interacting with people around me. And I need to soften that approach and being like, well, what's something more open-ended? What's an adjustment I can make that would get me heading in the right direction, rather than I need to make these massive changes overnight? Everything's like you build into things, and that smooths out the road for you. Otherwise, we're trying to change too much too fast. And now we get all this this tension and conflict, and it doesn't really need to happen that way. It's making peace with it, and it's accepting people for where they're at. It's accepting that, hey, people are used to interacting with me on this level, but I can no longer play that role. So I'm going to like kind of guide them to what the new version of me is. And it's usually, suggestions. It's usually I create more space. And in that space, like I'm releasing my detachments to showing up that way. If I'm no longer emotionally charged or triggered by the things they're doing, yeah, they'll eventually adjust. But if I feel like I need to have a war with them to change things, that's where all the problems happen. And that doesn't really get us anywhere. So it's always about seeing like, yeah, this worked for me up into a certain point, and now I've grown into this new person. They may not understand that. Like, they might not know how to meet me there. It's kind of working with them to meet me there, rather than just having these drastic shifts. And it's always a softening of how we're showing up. I don't need them to change because I'm changing me, right? If I'm changing me, like, I'm going to be showing up differently pretty naturally. It's not extra effort. As I'm showing up differently, they're naturally going to be interacting with me differently too. And if I'm having a charge to what people are saying, that just means I'm still like tied up to that old role. That means I'm still stuck in it. All we're trying to do is continuously free you up from that, so that you don't have those reactions anymore. Because once the reactions are gone, there's nothing for them to pull on. There's no strings attached to that. We can move forward pretty naturally. But once again, it's this gradual, like, okay, when this happens, I have this reaction within me. That's the piece we address. We just keep addressing that over and over again until there's nothing left. Once there's nothing left, you're going to just experience people differently. You're going to shift the dynamic. But we have to be able to we have to let go of like, if I have to be this way in order to stay safe. That's the main piece. Because like, if I'm not this way, then I'm going to get abandoned, or I'm going to get attacked, or whatever it is. Most of that stuff's not true anymore. If we've built a long relationship with somebody, usually there's a lot that keeps us bound to it, and any little like conflict isn't going to destroy that usually. But that's more of like people we just met. That's people we don't have a shared history with. That's, situations that are pretty new, where there's not a foundation to it. But if there's a foundation, we can do the part of working on our piece of detaching from the old you and trying to integrate this new you. The more we do that, the more you let go of that old version anyway. This happens to me all the time with family. Nobody really knows what I do in my family. Like they just latch on to like, oh, like you do like nutrition plans or something. Cause that's what I studied in college was nutrition. And I'm like, no, that part of me is like gone a long time ago. Right. But it's like, it's just like, I care less. I don't need you to like be like, "Oh, you're this amazing coach," or whatever. Like that doesn't like carry any weight for me anymore. Where it's like early on, like I really wanted validation, but it's like the more you don't need it, the more it's just like, well, yeah, that's the version of me that's still in their mind. I'm not attached to it. If I'm not attached to it, it's not really gonna create any problems.
Let's wrap this one up a little bit. Any closing thoughts?
I think it's just the main idea is if you want to shine, if you want to be seen, you got to really question like, well, growing up, was it safe to be seen? Or was I trying to hide, or was I trying to keep the peace? Like those types of things. And anytime we're trying to put ourselves where we're more visible, those things are going to creep up on us. And so it really serves us to take a look at that if we're conscious of it. As you take the steps, they're naturally going to come up, and that might be the time to address it. But there are some things we can get out ahead of. And like I said, I really feel for the kid. He's like 17 to be dealing with this in the spotlight. Because it got exposed, and now it's just like, well, now you got to work on it. Like there's not a lot you can prepare for ahead of that, because you don't really expect that to happen, right? And so it's kind of it's developing self-compassion. If I have these things where I notice I really shut down in certain situations, we just try to dig a little deeper and figure out why that is. And if it was like a survival skill, if you needed to be that way in certain situations, it's like it's only trying to protect you. And so it was a gift for you at one point, like it's what kept you safe, but that might be what's holding you back from taking your next step. It's the nature of the work we do here. It's really getting to the bottom of that and making peace with your past so that you can move forward and evolve. And these are very, very common problems. Most people didn't have peaceful sunshine and rainbows childhoods, or they might have had less conflicted ones, but there might have been a lot of superficial stuff or a lot of fakeness. There's all these different expressions of it, but that's definitely, if you've had an intense version, there's going to be some work to do there, and that might be what's holding you back from even like believing that other things are possible for you, right? If your identity has been wrapped up in hiding and just surviving, you might not be able to think long term. You might not be able to think of these bigger dreams or visions because it's in direct conflict with you staying safe. I encourage people to just kind of wrestle with it, being like, well, like, is this still the case? Do I still need to operate this way? What's a small step I can take to be more visible? And, that doesn't mean you have to go post every day and do all these things. It's putting yourself out there in a new way. It's putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. It's allowing yourself to make mistakes. So if we had a hypercritical parent, a lot of times we adopted a perfectionist mentality where it's not safe to make mistakes. So it's just like, okay, I'm just going to actually do things where I know I'm going to make mistakes. And then I need to develop the self-compassion to help me through that so that I can form this new relationship with myself, so that everything isn't so bound up in pressure and all this extra stress. It's really getting back to the place of peace. It's a reparenting process. So you're addressing these younger versions of yourself with a compassionate lens. That's going to soften the energy and makes you feel safe. And then that's what allows you to move out into the world in a bigger way.
Right. So, as we do every week, do you want to let people know the best places to find you and anything else you got going on that you want people to know about?
If you're interested in this work, struggling with being visible, you can schedule a free 30-minute strategy session with me. You can go to my website, brandonthielk.com, and book a call with me, and I'll get a sense of what you've got going on and share how I can help. Also, if you want to register for my newsletter, that's on my website as well. So I send out the lightning report weekly about some updates on the business and some insights for the week. Also, if you want to follow along on YouTube and Instagram at Brandon Thielk, we post out there pretty regularly, and at bthielk on TikTok. So please like, subscribe, follow. We'll keep you updated with all the happenings in the business. If you have any questions, please reach out. I'd love to to shine a light on anything you guys are looking to learn and help you work through some of your problems. So feedback would definitely be helpful.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And just
Mhm.
as a reminder, if you have a question for Brandon, you can hit us up in any of the places he already mentioned via comments or DM, or you can email the podcast at brandonthelk.com. We would love to get some questions for the question for Brandon segment and hopefully to do another Ask Me Anything in the semi near future.
I'll see you next time.
All right, talk to you later.